All right, let's go over a quick method on how to get some mountainous landscapes. This method's probably only going to work for some mountains that are really in the distant background, so I wouldn't recommend this if you need close-ups or, I wouldn't use this asset in the foreground, but that's okay. Let's go over it, and I think it'll still be helpful in a lot of scenarios. So I'm just going to hit A to select all the default objects in here and delete them. And first thing we need to do is make sure that we have an add-on turned on that comes with Blender. So if you go into Edit, Preferences, and just search for Landscape, you'll get this Add Mesh ANT Landscape option. Just need to make sure that's checked on. Now you can X out of that, and when you hit Shift A to place a mesh, you should now see this landscape option right here. So let's select that, and you should see something right away. It might not look quite like this because I've messed with the settings a little bit, but that's okay. If you just unfurl this menu down here that pops up, you should get all the settings available to you. One quick note, this menu will disappear if you make any changes, if you scale or move this object. So you definitely want to set everything here and make sure you're happy with it first, and then move it and scale it if you need to. So let's go over just a couple of these settings. I honestly don't know what every single one of these do, but I'm just going to mention the most useful ones here. So right off the bat, down here under display settings, and you can scroll up and down in this menu if you don't see that, there's this height option, and you should be able to adjust kind of how mountainous the terrain is looking with that. And if you go too high, you'll get a really flat top like that, and that's because we're crossing over this maximum value. So if you wanted something really tall, you could adjust the maximum to be even higher, and you'd get something even more crazy. But let's lower that a bit for now. Another one you should probably be aware of is this mesh size X and Y option. So right now we basically have just one mountain kind of growing out of a single square tile. But if we adjusted the mesh size in the X axis and the Y axis, you could potentially get a really expansive landscape, or a really expansive looking landscape. This does make the object more heavy though, so I wouldn't recommend doing this in general. It's probably better just to stick with a smaller scale landscape and then just duplicate some instances of that mountain around your scene. So that's what we're going to be doing for now, just so that it doesn't become too heavy. Also, there's a certain set amount of density to this object, and you can adjust the subdivisions X and Y to make it more detailed, basically. And you'll see, I don't know if you can see that, but it is actually getting a little bit more detailed as I up that. So you might want that. We're not going to actually do that too much for now, because we can do that later with a subdivision modifier and a displacement modifier as well. So we want to keep kind of the base mesh here pretty simple, all things considered. There's a lot more options in here. If you click this drop down, you get all these different types of terrain, and you really just kind of have to scroll through here and check and see if you like certain options. So I definitely recommend going through all these and trying them out. And I think that's pretty much all we need to know for now about this add-on. So let's say we were happy with that, and if we just click out of here, that menu will disappear again forever, so you won't be able to adjust this any further. And let's select this and tab into edit mode, go into face mode, and just see, okay, so here's our mesh that we've now placed in our scene. And there is a nice, a certain amount of density there, but I want to add in basically even more detail for us to get something more realistic looking. So there's a lot of ways to do that, but the way we're going to try is just clicking over here to modifiers and adding in a subdivision surface. And you won't see any changes unless you click this levels viewport up to 2. And now it's doubling the amount of detail basically in both the render view and in the viewport view. So if you click this button right here, you can actually toggle that on and off in the viewport. And you can see, I don't know if you can actually see that, but there is kind of another level of detail being added now. So let's keep that on. And we could always up this to 3 if we needed even more detail. And we might do that as kind of a last step in the render, but for now, let's just keep it at 2. And then there's another step here to add one more kind of level of rockiness to this. So this subdivision will allow this next step to be to kind of take its full effect. So we do need this first, and let's add in another modifier and add in a displacement modifier, which I always lose somehow. There it is, displace. And this doesn't look too good right now, and that's because we need to make a lot of adjustments. So first of all, we need to lower the strength quite a bit. It's just way too strong for this particular setup. So let's put it to 0.1 for now. And it's displacing with this weird bubbly effect. We definitely want to make that a more believable kind of rocky terrain. So the way I'm going to do that is by clicking this add in new texture to this modifier option. And you should get this slot here now. And let's rename that to mountain rockiness or something like that, just so that we don't get too confused. And we can actually import a texture to that, we can import a map to that texture, I should say, if we click down here to this texture properties option. So let's click on that. And before we import a displacement map for that to work on, I just want to make you aware, if you click on this type dropdown in here, you can actually use some procedural options that Blender has by default within it. So let's just try clouds, for example, and you'll see right here this black and white example is kind of the map that's being displaced. So that is looking a little bit more rocky, and you can mess with all these options to get it potentially more realistic looking for a mountain. Obviously, that's not probably the direction we want to go, but you could definitely have a lot of fun and maybe get something more alien and crazy looking with all these different options. Distorted noise can sometimes be good. Again, you'd have to mess with all these settings to get it to look somewhat realistic. Musgrave I've had some success with as well. So try all these and see what you think. But for now, let's actually import our own texture map. So what I've actually done is I've downloaded a somewhat rocky texture from Bridge again. So Quixel Bridge, that has a lot of really great maps already in it. So let's go grab one from there. So in order to import it, let's click this type back over to image or movie. And that will allow us to click this open option to go find the map that we want. So here in my Megascans library, I'm going to go into downloaded and go into surface. And here's all the different types of materials that I've downloaded. And I have this rock rough one right here. You should be able to find that too, or any kind of really rocky type of material will work for this. And all we need for this is this displacement map right here, this JPEG. We don't need the EXR, just the JPEG. And let's open that up. And you'll see this is already looking much more realistic. And here's the actual black and white representation of that map. And you see it was just kind of a simple rocky. And it wasn't even a particularly large scale, but when it's kind of mapped and displaced across this massive mountain, it does end up giving some nice effects. So we can always adjust that further back here in the modifiers with the strength if we wanted to. But I think somewhere around 0.1 is probably a good idea. You can adjust the mid-level as well. That's kind of the displacement from the half weight point. So let's keep that on 0.5 for now. And so now we had that base mesh. We added some detail potential with the subdivision, and then we added in an actual displacement map for that final level of detail. So that's kind of the base mesh we're going to work with. And let's talk about what or how to set up a material of some kind that looks somewhat realistic. So let's open up, or let's unfurl this menu down here a little bit further and change that over to the shader editor. And let's create a new material for this. So make sure our object's selected, click plus, and click new, and let's rename this, mountain 1 or something like that. And now we should see the nodes here. And I guess you just probably want to follow along what I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to set up a few nodes that are going to give us something to work with. So first things first, we need to hit Shift A and click on search and find a nice mix shader node and click that here so that this original material is hooked up to the top there. And then let's actually copy and paste this node so that we have two options. And we'll plug that second one into the bottom of the mix shader. And next we have to plug something into this factor of the mix shader to determine how these two different materials are going to be mixed. So what we want is a separate XYZ shader. Place that there, and we want to hook this Z option to the factor here. And real quick, let's add in a color ramp between those two so that we can control how strong it is basically. And next we need to click on the separate XYZ and real quick, make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on turned on, which comes with Blender. If you don't know what I'm talking about, again, it's just Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, search for Node Wrangler, and make sure that's checked on. And what that will allow us to do is just that if we have this node selected and click or hit Control T, we'll get the mapping information for that node, which is quite handy. And from here, we actually are going to delete this image texture node. We don't need that. And hook this back up to here. So here's the mapping that's controlling that separation. And we want to change it over from this UV to the normal. So let's connect those. And that's all looking pretty good. So finally, let's change the color of these principled BSDF shaders real quick so that we are mixing two different types. And all we want to do for now is change this base color over to green. So we have some kind of green vegetation. And then on this one, let's get a sort of tan, kind of rocky texture for now, and we can always adjust this later. So let's check this in material view just to see what we've done. So basically, we're mixing these two different colors. It's all, there's no maps attached yet. They're just base colors. And we're mixing them by showing the green value anytime a plane is facing upward, right, towards the Z-axis. And then we're getting this tan or rocky color anytime a plane is not facing upward. And that's generally speaking kind of the way mountains work, right? Vegetation and grass usually grows on the top planes of things. So that's a good place to start for realism. So you can actually control the kind of fall off and edges of this with this color ramp. So if you adjust this black to be up further or the white to be down, you can see we're controlling kind of the placement a little bit of the green there, and then also kind of the fall off of its transition to the rock color. So you probably want to kind of crunch that up a little bit just so that it's not so soft feeling, and we can adjust that endlessly to get some cool effects later. Okay, so that's basically a great place to start. So let's check this in rendered view really quick. So first of all, let's switch over to cycles and make sure we're on GPU compute. And then let's add in a nice sky and sun. So let's go over to this world option. And again, delete the background node and Shift A and search for sky texture and plug that in here to surface and make sure we're on the Nishita option. And now if we switch over to rendered view, we should get something close to realistic daytime lighting. Usually I up the ozone a little bit just to get a little bit more blue value in there, maybe the air a little bit. And then I find the sun intensity usually needs to be lowered a little bit as well. Okay, so now we're seeing this with some more realistic light, and that'll help us continue to make it even better. So let's switch back over to the object material. And from here, there's a few different directions we could take. We could select each of these materials individually and import with Control-Shift-T, set up a principled texture setup, and add in, find some kind of a grass map material and plug that into here, and then some kind of a rock material and plug that into here. And that would give you some nice realistic results. But I kind of want to just for now stick with a more procedural approach that will look a little bit less realistic up close, but I think is a little bit faster to set up and also doesn't require some really high resolution texture maps. So let's just see if we can fake those types of textures real quick. So first, let's do the green vegetation one. All I'm going to do is hit Shift-A, create a normal map, and that needs to plug to this normal input right here. And then behind that, let's create a Voronoi texture node and plug that into here. So Voronoi texture, I've just found works the best for this, and I'll show you why in a second. So first things first, it's way too big of a scale right now. So let's scale that way down. And each little piece of this Voronoi texture is starting to create some kind of fake little vegetation in there. If you zoom in, you can see it's just varying colors basically, but they are catching the light in different ways. Right now it's way too strong, and that's why it's getting all pure black. So let's lower the strength of this normal map to 0.5 or maybe even 0.3. And maybe the scale could be a little bit smaller as well. Okay, so that's going to be a really quick way. And again, just from a really far distance, that normal map will be catching the light, and it'll kind of feel like some vegetation or trees are in there. Okay, so let's try something for the rock texture. So again, that's this tan node up here. And let's add in, again, a normal map node and plug that in here. And for the texture for this map, I've just found the Musgrave texture option to work a little bit better for this. It's a little bit more rocky, and plug that in here. And you can see we're getting some crazy effects again because the scale is way too big. So let's lower that until we start to see some kind of small detail in there. Let's lower the strength again as well to something like 0.3. And maybe even a little higher, 0.5, just so that we can see what we're doing. And you are starting to see some texture in there, but you can adjust this a little bit for it to look better. And honestly, you should just mess with the values until it looks good. But I think what's worked for me in the past is upping the detail a little bit, lowering the dimension, and I believe lowering this option as well. And we don't have to check this in fully rendered cycles mode. We can also see how this is looking in material preview. And yeah, we'll see we're getting some kind of little rocky-ish texture in there. Let's mess with the scale, a little bit smaller. And yeah, it's a good place to start. So let's switch back over to cycles and just kind of take a step back. So we have, we started with a real simple add-on that gave us a very simple mountain mesh. We added on detail with a subdivision modifier and a displace modifier. We imported a displacement map, some kind of rocky displacement map to that displace to get even more detail. And then this was our node setup. Again, just to mix those two materials based on what direction the planes are facing. And again, we can continue to adjust this with this color ramp. If you wanted more or less, trees or vegetation on there, you could adjust that all the way. Or if you wanted it to be mostly rock, you could go this way. So that's pretty much my trick for getting some real quick and loose distant mountains. I'll show you one more quick thing here. And you can actually just adjust this green value to some kind of a white color and start to get some snow real quick. And you might want to adjust this shader a little bit for it to look even more like snow. I found if you up the metallic a little bit, lower the roughness a little bit, you might start to get something that feels a bit more like snow. So you could definitely, duplicate all these nodes and put them into a new shader, and we'd have a really great rock and snow option that we could switch back and forth between.